Hey guys, welcome back to Car Culture TV, or as we like to call it, CCTV. I'm Aryan,
I'm on it.
and in this episode, we have three lovely segments for you guys. The first of which is Speed Trap, which you're probably familiar with, which is our weekly news segment, in which we'll detail the latest news in the car culture world. And then we'll move on to two brand new segments, the first of which we like to call Cutting the Apex, where we'll be talking about some of the latest developments in racing. And then finally, we'll end with the segment we like to call Glow Up or Throw Up, where we'll discuss some cars that have changed quite drastically over the years. So now, let's get into Speed Trap. So one of the latest developments we have in the car culture world, in spite of all these delays, we are seeing quite a lot of new cars being released. And one such car is the Acura TLX Type S. So we saw concept images of what they call the Acura Type S released not too long ago. And it was released in this brilliant blue. And I mean, it has a lot of potential. We're looking at a lot of new cars being introduced in that like Kia Stinger type segment where you have like sports sedans. And it's nice to see companies like Acura finally making like revolutionary designs, right?
Right, it's definitely very interesting to see Acura. Honestly, I feel like in a lot of ways, though, they are playing catch up, right? So Acura is Honda's luxury branch. They really are only famous in the United States as Acura. Everywhere else in the world, they're still badged as Honda vehicles, but fancier and more expensive. And so, it is good to see that they've created this really elegant design. It looks classy, still luxurious, but also now it's bringing along with it some of that sport. And it's actually really good to see some of the NSX design elements coming down into more of this consumer friendly tier where it's still a pricier car, right? I'm imagining this will still be somewhere in the 30 to 40 up to 50,000 price range. But it's a lot more accessible to the general customer compared to an Acura NSX, which is like $150,000. And we're getting some of that sportiness that we've been longing for so long since the old Acura in the 90s.
Yeah, like Acura has released sport trims for a lot of their car brands, including the TLX. But with this Type S trim, it actually looks like it's something new and revolutionary that's actually transforming the car, not just adding some like plastic aero kits or just giving like a 2% power increase or something like that. And we have some more images of it. So from the side angle, it looks absolutely marvelous. Everything from the rims to the brake calipers to the overall design, it looks great, in my opinion.
Right, I absolutely agree with you. One good thing is, unlike the A spectrum that has existed for a little bit now, you're right, it adds a lot more design elements beyond just the little black plastic trim here and there. One of the most striking parts of this car, in my opinion, is really the rear end. We get a good look at it here from the side profile, and it reminds me a little bit of like a Maserati Gran Turismo style rear end, but kind of redone in this new design, new futuristic look. And you can even see the sidelines are really smooth, overarching. The car just looks bold but beautiful at the same time.
So yeah, of course, this is a concept design before the actual TLX is released, and that is apparently going to happen in a week or so. Even though the auto show, the New York Auto Show, where it was going to be released, was canceled, they are still planning on doing an unveiling. And so far, this is the preview image that we have of the car.
So that's one thing that really excited me. The rear end still looks fairly similar. Of course, it doesn't have as accentuated of those rear taillights, but there's a very aggressive rear diffuser on the bottom, a quad exhaust, which is really promising, a rear lip spoiler, and honestly, the car still looks really sporty and good from the back. So I'm really hopeful that they haven't watered down the concept too much, as car companies typically do. And hopefully, this is an incredible car that can come into this field and compete against cars like the Audi A5, the Kia Stinger, the Porsche Panamera, and really hold its own finally.
Yeah, it's really great to see a lot of new car companies getting into this sector where you're getting more of like a somewhat family but like approachable sports car that's way more affordable for people who just like want to have a sports car but not pay at least like 60K and above to buy it.
Exactly. So I'm really looking forward to this.
So our next bit of news, the Nissan GT-R 50 Ital design. Well, so we've seen this car for a couple of different years. Since about 2018, this concept images have been released. But Ital Design has finally stated that these cars are going to finally be delivered, and the people that pre-ordered them are actually going to be getting them soon. But it does bring back the whole question of, is the Nissan GT-R 50, what, like, is the design almost like dead? Because even though this is really futuristic, it's essentially the same thing as the original R50 that Ital Design doesn't have anything to do with.
This car design does remind you a lot of the current GTR, the normal GTR that you can buy on the road. One thing that's really unfortunate, however, is that Nissan had to reach out to this basically coach building custom company, Ital Design, and then say, "Can you help make a fancier version of our car?" It's almost like their designers are saying, we don't want to do this type of thing. And remind me again what the price of this car is.
Yeah, it's quite expensive, and we're looking at about $1 million price range for a car that the normal version is starting price at 100,000. It's somewhat approachable.
Right, and that's one of the things that's really unfortunate. Not only have they made a car that's beautiful but asked someone else to do it, they're also making it significantly less accessible. The one beauty of the GTR that it's always had is that it's, really quote unquote an entry level sports car, Godzilla, that can compete against Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and Porsches, beat them in straight lines and on tracks, even though it looks like a beast, and it is. Now you're making this car $1 million, and that's putting it in hypercar range. But if you're going to charge $1 million for this car, now you're competing with Koenigsegg and Pagani, and really, this car, I doubt, will be able to hold its own against those.
Yeah, and here's a back image of it just to look more of the design. But I really, yeah, I don't think that it's able to compete with other $1 million cars. Like take the Porsche 918 for example. It's a beast on the track, and it's absolutely amazing. And it's about the same price that this car would eventually sell for, which is just like it's. This car doesn't look like it's worth that much either. I mean, it looks futuristic, but there's an extent where I won't be paying $1 million just for a futuristic design. And it really does bring in a lot of speculation about how Nissan's interior development has been going, because they had to reach out to a company like Ital Design to make a special version of the car. People have been saying that the Nissan GTR 50 design is like it's running out of its time. It's been here since about 2009 or so,
Yeah.
and it's like they haven't changed it at all. And people have been getting really mad that their sports division is kind of losing it. And I don't know, this car, as impressive as it may look, I don't think it really helps with that message.
Yeah, that's the thing. If you look at Nissan's other lineup, when some of their first cars came out of this kind of new generation, everyone was really excited. They've got this V Motion grille and this completely new philosophy. But the thing is, they've kind of accidentally homologated their entire lineup by making them all look really similar, by really sticking to the design philosophy very aggressively. And the GTR was the one car that could really stand out and look nothing like a Nissan except for the badge. Now you're asking a outside company to really design it. It really doesn't say good things about the interior design and really what's going on in house in Nissan and how they're recovering from the whole Carlos Ghosn issue.
Yeah, Nissan is definitely going to have to revamp all their styling, but hopefully, I mean, we have heard some news that they are changing some of their logos for the new Nissan Z car that's coming out, so maybe we'll get there eventually.
I sure hope so.
The Volkswagen IDR. Uh, Everyone knows about this car. It's at the records at Pikes Peak, it's at the record at Goodwood, and it's electric. It's an electric racing car. It's quite impressive, wouldn't you say so?
Absolutely. It's the fastest car around the Nürburgring. If you see in the onboard footage, that thing is blazingly fast. It's incredible because it's finally really a testament to show that electric cars can be incredibly fast on a track and are highly capable performance wise.
So yeah, the name IDR. R is the terminology that Volkswagen applies to all of their sports division cars that have a sports line package. So like the Volkswagen Golf R. Well, recently the head of Volkswagen said that they are thinking of making all of their R line cars electric, and we can only assume that that applies to cars like the Volkswagen Golf, which is a timeless car almost. People love the Volkswagen Golf R, and they really like it because like car traditional car people like it about having a manual and it being like having an engine while not being electric. So I really wonder if it's going to be able to hold its stance in the market if they switched it to electric when its primary car buyers are people that are just like traditional.
Yeah, absolutely. The Golf R has kind of been a leader in the pack of the hot hatch segment. It competes against things like the Type R and the Focus RS really aggressively, and it's actually done really well. Like you mentioned, car people love it because you're getting typically an all wheel drive setup and you're getting that manual and you're getting that fun hot hatch feel with a lot of power. It really packs a punch for such a small car and so being so lightweight. So it will be interesting to see them lose that. A lot of people in the car world are big fans of the R's exhaust. They typically mod the exhaust a lot, and that's like a big part of the tuner culture. I think that switching to an electric platform will rob some of the car purists and some of the car tuners from the customizability that this kind of platform normally offers.
I think that to an extent, yeah, it does rob them a lot of that, but as we're seeing with active sound developments, we are seeing things that you can modify electric cars to an extent, and maybe Volkswagen will make it easy for people to add in like an active sound exhaust, which is essentially like a speaker that simulates an exhaust sound,
Hmm.
and make some other things customizable so they can still tune their cars. But we can only hope that at least the Volkswagen GTI will still be naturally aspirated, because then car people will still have a fallback, if not the Golf R.
Yeah, that's true. I really hope that, when this change does come into place, it's not an overnight thing and they aren't just replacing the entire lineup and saying, all right, next year it's all electric or don't buy it. You know what I mean? They are going to have to kind of ease us into it. The future is definitely electric. No matter what company you're looking at, it's definitely the case. So, in some ways, it is promising to see Volkswagen finally deciding to, take part in leading the charge a little bit and begin to change their complete lineup. But it will also still be a bittersweet moment when we lose the beauty of this car with its internal combustion engine.
And then going back to the Volkswagen IDR, this car is also setting a stance for electric cars being dominant in the racing industry. And it also proves to threaten racing series such as Formula One, NASCAR, and IndyCar that are traditional gas powered racing series.
Yeah.
So I think the world is shifting to electric and it's happening quite quickly. And I think if they shift other forms of traditional racing to electric, then people will be easier to adjust to like the Golf R being an electric car.
That's definitely true. Since the beginning of like racing, the cars on the track have defined what is cool and sporty and popular for the cars on the road. So if Volkswagen can achieve that by showing electric cars as super sporty, super fast, and really cool, and showing off their tech in a race setup, then I'm sure that it will also popularize their street segment and their normal lineup for customers that are really big fans of motorsport and want to see that same technology in their daily drivers.
Yeah, I think that people look to race cars when they want to buy their own car. They want to remind them of like their favorite winning race car. And the IDR will definitely revolutionize how future electric cars are going to be constructed and what they'll be modeled after.
Absolutely.
Now we're going to move into our brand new segment, Cutting the Apex. As you guys may recall, this segment is our segment in which we'll be discussing the latest developments in racing, and today's topic is Formula One. Now, this 2020 season has obviously been cut short quite a bit, but recent developments are making it seem like the 2021 season will be quite interesting, especially when we look at the driver lineup for that season.
Yeah, I feel like this is almost F1's way of keeping us fans that have been yearning for some racing to stay in with the drama that comes behind the scenes off the racetrack.
So yeah, it's definitely really really interesting. Currently, a lot of top teams and most of the back benchmarkers do not have their seats filled. Like Mercedes has no seats technically filled as of now. Neither does AlphaTauri, which is the Toro Rosso replacement. Well, the same team, but they just changed their name. And then neither does Williams, neither does Haas, neither does Alfa Romeo, and even Red Bull has a seat open, as does Renault and
Yeah, it's definitely a very interesting mix. It's nice to actually see a decent amount of movement among teams. Now, if you're new to Formula One and you haven't really kept up with a lot of the drivers, um, essentially the typical breakdown is that some of the top three teams in Formula One, at least in the last 5 years, have been Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull. And typically, we don't see frequent driver changes among those teams. We see that they like to renew the contracts with those drivers because they tend to perform really well in their car. But for the first time this season, after a long time, we're seeing Ferrari losing Sebastian Vettel, four-time Formula One world champion when he raced with Red Bull, and they're replacing him with Carlos Sainz, who has originally, since before this, driven with Red Bull and with McLaren.
hmm. And then the other really interesting thing is that everyone is speculating who Mercedes might choose as their next driver. As some of you guys may know, Mercedes has currently had Lewis Hamilton, who is the 6 time world champion, one of the best Formula One car drivers of all time, as their number one driver. And their secondary driver has been a man named Valtteri Bottas, who has been a really good number two for Lewis Hamilton. He doesn't really get in his way much, but he is a good driver in his own respect. He's very talented and very skilled, and when Lewis doesn't do the job, he can definitely make up for it.
Mm-hmm.
But currently, none of them are signed for 2021. And with Vettel, the 4 time world championship, leaving Ferrari, there's much speculation in thinking that maybe he'll take one of those spots because maybe he's the thing that Mercedes might use to replace Valtteri Bottas and have a more competitive number two.
So that's been really interesting to me. If we look back in the past, Before Valtteri Bottas came in to join Mercedes, we had Nico Rosberg, who was a friend and fellow karter when Lewis Hamilton was growing up. And at Mercedes, in Nico Rosberg's last season, they had a bitter rivalry. You know what I mean? They were fighting tooth and neck to win every single race, colliding with each other a couple times, and actually not even being able to finish races. And that bitter rivalry was honestly a headache for Mercedes, who just wanted their cars across the line to win the Constructors' Championship or the Team Championship and not the Drivers' Championship. And so I think Mercedes would actually be really wary of adding such a number one hound dog like Sebastian Vettel out and adding him to the team because they already have that in Lewis Hamilton.
And we've seen several other times that Vettel isn't always the best team player, as we saw in the 2019 Brazilian Grand Prix when he was trying to make a pass on his own teammate, Charles Leclerc. He ended up giving Leclerc and himself a puncture, crashing them both out of the race.
Right, and you can always go back and forth on whose fault that was and who had the driving line and the racing line and who had the right of way. But at the end of the day, it's important to consider incidents like that. And a lot of rumors have been swirling around that the reason that Vettel chose not to sign with Ferrari is because Ferrari told him that they wanted to make Charles Leclerc, their last year rookie driver, as their head dog, their number one driver, and have Sebastian Vettel kind of take a little step back and be their secondary driver. And maybe that's why he left.
And there were a lot of indicators of Leclerc being their number one driver, because usually when everyone does their car unveils before the season starts, on the car they'll put their number one driver on towards the back of the car on the top, and then they'll put their secondary driver on the nose of the car on the top of that car there. And in this case, they put Leclerc's number on the back, which in previous years it was number 5 for Sebastian Vettel all the way in the back, but now Leclerc's number was in the back, making a clear statement that they are kind of prioritizing Leclerc and his development on the team.
Right, so then Sebastian Vettel decides to leave Ferrari, but now the question becomes, especially if Mercedes decides to re-sign Valtteri Bottas with Lewis Hamilton, where is Sebastian going to go?
Exactly, especially because he did refuse the McLaren seat that opened up when Ferrari used the McLaren driver to fill their current spot.
Right, and then we saw Renault's last year's driver, Daniel Ricciardo, take a leap from Renault and move on to that McLaren, filling the McLaren seat.
And you'd think that if he rejected McLaren's offer because they were technically not a top 3 team, then the chances are he most likely won't be going to Renault, did worse than McLaren last season. And also, currently Renault is looking a lot at Fernando Alonso returning back to the sport and filling that seat. So the chances are he probably won't go there.
So I think with that, the F1 driver lineup is honestly going to be very interesting to watch. I do think that a lot of these teams that haven't confirmed either driver will probably end up renewing the contract at least for the season of 2021. But with the large rules overhaul and huge rule change in 2022, it's very possible that Sebastian Vettel might even take a year back to watch the season finish and then jump back in when these cars have been completely redesigned for 2022.
Yeah, 2021 surely will be an interesting season, though, with that changed driver lineup. Now let's move into glow up or throw up. Now in glow up or throw up, we're going to be discussing cars that have changed drastically over the years, and if their change has been good, or if it's been, well, worthy of some throw up. So the first one we have here is the Mercedes A-Class. Now, yeah, this is an older picture of the car, and this is when, like, back in the day, about maybe 20 years ago, I'd say.
Yeah, this is definitely a polarizing car, primarily sold only in Europe. It was definitely interesting to see Mercedes take on this design philosophy and really put out their first hatchback in a long time. But overall, in terms of design, I would say it wasn't very timeless and it didn't really turn any heads.
And this car is heavily memed in the car culture world. People make fun of this car left and right, mostly because it kind of looks like if someone took a minivan and then, in PowerPoint where you can just like shrink an image diagonally, well, that's exactly what they did.
Absolutely.
And the wheels are also about 2 inches tall, which is an interesting change. But yeah, it's not a traditional looking car, especially from back then when most cars were either boxy SUVs or stylish sedans. Well, now we have a new A-Class, the 2020 A-Class. And I'd say there's some significant changes in the design.
Yeah, I completely agree. This is the AMG version of the A-Class, and man, this car can turn heads. The exhaust is incredible, the looks are honestly very good, and Mercedes' new matte gray finish that costs like an extra $4 grand to put on the car is honestly absolutely worth it because it looks beautiful.
Yeah, it's honestly this car is definitely it's much better than the original A class, and the headlights look a lot much better. It really fits that sporty hot hatch stereotype that most people have when they think about that car class.
Right. And so I really do think the Mercedes A Class, fortunately, and thank you to the engineers at Mercedes, has had a wonderful glow up.
For sure. Our next car is the Chevy Blazer. So this is the original Blazer from back in the day, and yeah, it looks like a traditional SUV. It's boxy, it has square headlights, and I mean it's a stereotypical SUV.
Yeah, this is one of those classic cars that you would see in typical suburban neighborhoods and, anywhere in America. And they were beautiful. They were iconic. It's a two-door raised SUV, a lot of space in the back, very comfortable, really large, big tires, that popular grabber tires that it was known for. And people actually even enjoyed going off-roading in this thing and doing rock climbing and stuff like that. So it was a really rugged, all-terrain type of vehicle with a big grunt and a very classy type car back in the day.
And they actually did sell convertible versions, and it was kind of a competition car to the Ford Bronco, which it looks kind of like at the same time. And because of the convertible feature, it directly competed against. And when you think about the Ford Bronco and akin the Chevy Blazer, you think of a rugged off-road vehicle that's kind of fun, but also like when you need it to be dependable, it'll be dependable.
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of the beauties of this car, that it wasn't just for a certain type of person. It wasn't just for a certain region in the States. It was a car you could drive to work and then on the weekends go take on a dirt track or to the beach and go wild.
So now they actually discontinued the Chevy Blazers for some years, a few years ago, and they decided to bring it back. So here is the new Chevy Blazer.
So upon first glance, I immediately think if the Camaro had a child with an SUV, this is what would come out.
And look, personally, it looks pretty good for a sporty SUV. The blacked out trim and the red color and those Camaro headlights, I think it looks like a really good car. And I'm sure on the inside it's equally as good.
Right. Chevy has gone a long way in terms of improving their interior design, their luxury. The materials are good. There's leather seats. There's a great design and obviously great technology to come with it. And of course, they're, following on this typical design philosophy that a lot of crossovers and SUVs are taking on of breaking apart the main functional headlights and the accent LEDs. So you see the accent LEDs sitting on the top, giving it that Camaro look, but then the actual job of lighting up the road is done where typically fog lights would be, with the main headlights sitting at that position. And the car definitely looks a lot more aggressive. They have different trims, some sportier than others, and it really looks like it would be a lot of fun to drive day to day to work, give you a little bit of grunt when you need it, but also nothing too much.
And here's the thing: the original Chevy Blazer, you saw it. It's a rugged car, and like it's boxy and it's meant to go off roading. But this looks like a civilian car at the end of the day, and it's also not necessarily a sports car. It doesn't really have power specs to be on the track. It's a civilian car at the end of the day, and not that rugged sports car that competed with the Ford Bronco.
Right, so when it comes to whether this car is a glow up or a throw up, I'm personally really torn because one car was so different in its utility and its functionality, and this car is serving a completely different purpose. Honestly, it seems like they just carried the name over, but really completely reinvented the wheel when it comes to what that car and that name was associated with and what it was meant to do.
I would say that as far as the Chevy Blazer names, if we're looking at only design aspects, then this car is a glow up. Its design is absolutely great in my opinion. I think it really looks out of the ordinary crossover design that most people think of. But if we go to functionality and what the Blazer name really means when it was first created, then this car has to be a throw up.
Yeah, the Blazer referred to trailblazing, really tearing apart a rugged outdoor trail. I see no soccer mom or father of 10 taking this car out onto a dirt track and going wild. And so, for that reason, I'd say that it's a throw up.
Our next car is the Acura NSX. And back in the 90s when this car was released, it was really, really special. I mean, it looks like a Ferrari almost, right?
Right, it came in and again was competing with those cars like the Nissan GTR and some of the like the Ferrari Testarossa, for example. And it looked incredible. It had the classic and timeless pop-up headlights. It had a wonderful light bar across the back, which it was one of the first cars to incorporate that design style. It was very powerful, a wonderful V6, had an all-wheel drive launch, I believe,
Yeah.
and was really cool, really fun, day to day, and a sports car. It was outstanding. It had a great exhaust. It turned heads. It really checked every single box for what it meant to be a sports car.
And also, the Formula One legend, Ayrton Senna, helped design and develop the car. So naturally, it was really, really fun to drive because Ayrton Senna knows his way around a car.
Absolutely.
So yeah, the car is obviously timeless. And then when Acura announced that they were going to bring it back, people were very excited because this car was revolutionary. And then this is what Acura unveiled.
Right. So originally, people were like so thankful that NSX was coming back. It was going to mean something. It was going to be incredible. And one of the things that's very hard to explain in the car world that typically happens with sports cars is drivers can connect with the car on an emotional level. It sounds weird at first that you can think of something so mechanical emotionally, but when you're driving a sports car, a good one at that, you feel emotions of connection and adrenaline and happiness that only come with a car that's really in tune with you and in tune with the road. One of the issues with the NSX that came out just recently, as good as it looks on paper, it's definitely a car that I could put on a wall. And as incredible as the specs sound on paper, the problem with it is it comes across as robotic when you drive it. One of the biggest issues is it's got that V6 hybrid engine, and it really robs the car of some of the pure connection that you had with it. And a lot of the tech on the car, while it does help it go around the track really fast, again, robs the car of that connection that it has to the road. And at the end of the day, then, a lot of purists are saying, yeah, it's cool. It's like an NSX with bells and whistles, but I'd still rather have the original one.
And yeah, the thing is, yeah, when it was first unveiled and people saw images of the car and when they saw that sneak peek of it in the Avengers movie, people were shocked because it looked really, really good and they were really, really excited for the car. But yeah, when people started driving it, all the technology and stuff that went into it kind of overwhelms the driver and it takes them out of the driving experience a little bit. And that's been a very popular complaint. But another thing is, they do call this car somewhat of a practical sports car. It does have a lot of trunk space, and because it's a V6 hybrid, it's quite efficient in nature.
Right. Relatively speaking, in the world of sports cars, this car has a decent amount of trunk space in the front since it is a mid engine car. You can actually take it grocery shopping. But I think one thing that Honda or Acura really forgot when they made this car is people that are buying $100,000, $150,000, $200,000 sports cars are not buying them because they want the practicality. If they want the practicality, they'll go and buy a typical Mercedes or BMW M car or AMG, right? They'll buy something that has four doors, you can put a car seat in the back, but still puts out 500 or 600 horsepower. This is a car that's mid engined and designed to make you happy when you hit the accelerator really hard and you hear that engine sound, right? And while this car does that in some ways, the practicality is kind of useless and it falls on deaf ears, if you will, because I'm not buying a sports car for how good it is for a trip to Walmart or Kroger. I'm buying a sports car because I want to smile every time I hit the ignition and rev it and take a corner really fast. And the car will do it, but it won't make me smile. And a lot of professional drivers that have been in this car and reviewed it have echoed those same sentiments.
So I think, although controversial, in the essence of pure sports cars and the essence of what the original Acura NSX meant, I think that this car is technically a throw up.
Right, as unfortunate as it is, I love this car. I love the design. It has a really striking blue that it comes with that I'm absolutely in love with. The car is incredible, and if I had a spare 100,000 lying around, would I buy it? Sure, why not? At least for a little bit. But when it comes to wanting a driver's car, a true sports car with a manual transmission that I can roll my own gears, feel the mid engine roaring behind me, and have that connection to the road, I'd go back and buy the original NSX. Honestly, in a lot of ways, it's like what Toyota did with the Supra. While the new Supra has the Supra badge, it's a completely different car underneath, and that's really what's happened. A lot of purists were saying, this is going to be the NSX, but with the new tech, and it's going to be so much cooler with ceramic disc brakes, and it's going to be so much cooler with, adaptive cruise when I want it and stuff like that. But it isn't an NSX at the end of the day. It's a different sports car. And
Hmm.
for that reason, I would say, unfortunately, this is a throw up.
Well, that's all we have for today. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to this channel, and watch our previous videos for more car culture. You can catch the audio version of our podcast at anchor.fm and Spotify. The link for that will be in the description. Also, be sure to follow us on Instagram at carculture_TV, and stay tuned for next week's episode. Thank you.
Thank you.